Well, hello, Catalina Foothills Church. It's Pastor John Stone, and I'm here with our town hall meeting. Normally, we would be doing these in person, but because of COVID and because our services are now closer together, we don't have space to do them. We're going to get back to doing those in person. We hope soon. We've been doing them typically in the spring and the fall, and we want to update you, the members of this church, and those who love and pray and care for this church. We want to update you on what's going on in our church and where we are, both in terms of our ministry and with our budget. So there's three things I want to do today, and I hope this is short enough so you can hang in there with me. But I want to talk about how our church has changed and what that means, and then how you can help. So most of you know God called me to be your pastor 3 years ago, this past October. And when I arrived, we had on staff at that point, we had Debbie Graves doing a wonderful job with our women's ministry. We had a part-time children's director, a youth pastor, Winston and John Miller, and we had three people working in our office. Well, immediately the youth pastor, Keegan, had to resign because he took a call to a church in Phoenix where he'd grown up, and we lost our youth minister. And then we had Amanda Quinn beautifully get pregnant with her fourth child and had to step aside as our part-time children's director. So from that point on, under the direction of the session, we began to rebuild this church. And when we showed up, there were fewer people, and now we've seen people growing. So two things have changed really since I became your pastor. One is the church has begun to grow again. Recently we had about 650 people in our two worship services. When I got here, a high number would be about 500, and we were averaging about 450 in the two services, especially in our second service we've grown. And since I've gotten here, we've rebuilt the staff to where we can be a church that does ministry to about 700 people. There are about 700 people who regularly attend that church. So from 3 years ago until now, we've seen our church grow in terms of the number of people coming. We've seen our church grow in terms of the number of programs we're doing. We've seen our youth ministry launch because we hired Chris Holland. We hired Lindsay Pierce to assist him. We hired Heather Bergeron to oversee our children's ministry. We went from a part-time to a full-time. We hired Chad Turner to be an assistant pastor. We hired Rob Penley to be an associate pastor. And we still have, thankfully, Winston and John Miller, even though John Miller is very part-time. And Winston is beginning to go part-time as he moves towards his full retirement. So from 3 years ago till now, we've seen a lot more people come to our church. We've seen a lot more programs take off. Our women's ministry has grown. It used to just meet on Tuesday. It got so big we had to move it to Tuesday and Thursday. Our youth ministry has grown so that there are more than 60 kids coming on Wednesday nights in the junior and senior highs, and they're doing trips. We've seen our men's ministry grow, and we've seen our worship ministry grow. We've also hired a second service worship director. We had Alicia Peru and now Mike Almaroth, and that's had a big impact on how we do worship. So what's happened is our church has grown, and we see God at work in our church as we continue to carry out the ministry of Christ, standing up for his word and proclaiming him as the only way by which men may be saved, and trying to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. But what that means is that we have more expenses now than we used to have. And I want to give a little bit of history of where we have been financially in this church, just so you understand as we update you on where we are in terms of our budget and where we'd like to be. I'd like to give you just a little bit of a history lesson. So in 2016, which was sort of the last year in some ways that was normative coming out of the Mark Ressler era, the church brought in about $2.174 million. And then in 2017, the church brought in $1.84 million. And you can see that that's a dip. And then in 2018, we had 1.737 come in. That was my first year. I was here 3 months, October, November, December. But additionally that year, we raised more than $200K, an additional $250K for our mortgage. To pay off our mortgage, we did a good job. In 2019, we began to see our church grow. We began to see our programs pick up. We began to hire more staff. We had 1.841 come in, and then in 2020, last year, we had about 1.1 2.952 come in. But again, that year we raised an additional $200,000 for the mortgage, and we paid the mortgage off. We paid our mortgage off. So this is the history of where we are in the church in Mark Russell's day, and even in the interim, has always brought in more than $2 million. And in really the good days in the past, that was probably more like 2.4 million. But we thank you for your giving. We thank you for your generosity and faithfulness. But as we see, we've begun to grow from that low point of 173 to 1.95. And we think in this year, I'm just going to use a different color to emphasize it. In 2021, as we close out this year, we're trending at giving about 2.1 million. And you've seen in the bulletin that our giving's ahead of what we projected. We projected it at 2 million, but you're giving about 2.1 million. And the effect of all this ministry is that we are spending more money. In these 3 years, as we were get going, we were comfortably living in this budget, but we were understaffed, we were underprogrammed. We were giving less money away to missions, we were giving less money away to church planning, we were giving less money away to local missions. But as our budget has grown, we've given more to missions, we've given more to local ministries, and we've hired more staff. We're beginning to spend at the level we were back when we were healthy in the days gone by. And we see that as we trend up. But what I want to do today is really help you understand and challenge you in our budget, because what it means is that as our money has changed and as we ask you to consider and prayerfully what you might give, we're doing that because we would like to see our budget actually for next year and even this year, we would like to see our budget hit it's our hope and our prayer that our budget might become $2.2 million. And you say, why? Why do we need more money? Well, I want to say, first of all, we'll learn to live, as you will, on the money that God gives us. We'll be faithful stewards of what you give us, and we'll live in the money that comes in. And whatever comes in this year, that's what we're going to set the budget for next year. And God has been faithful through you, and we have reserves in this church. So in the summer, when our tithing goes down, we have reserves we can dig into, and we pay them back in the year. But we're going to live on what we have. But the reason that we need to see, the reason we want to challenge you to give and ask you to participate with us is that we see certain things going on. First of all, we have seen this budget go up because we've invested in people. 3 years ago, we didn't have a full staff. Now we have a full staff. And when we ask you to give, and when I want to challenge you to prayerfully consider giving more than you did last year, for the first time ever, giving a gift at the end of the year, it's because we invest in people. We've invested in our staff. And we want to be able, for instance, to give our staff raises. Like you, our staff faces an inflation rate of about 6%, right? And that 6% means that if we continue to pay them at the same rate, they're kind of making less money, and we would like to be able to give them raises. Secondly, we've seen our health insurance go up this year. It had not gone up the last 2 years, but our health insurance has gone up about 10%. We're getting a final number on that, and that might be more. We've had unexpected maintenance costs. This church is older than 20 years. This week we had to replace 3 toilets that failed. We had to replace the lights in the sanctuary because the lights from 20 years ago, we could no longer get the ballast. In fact, they were about to make them illegal. We had to put up new lights. That was an unexpected expense. We could not, you can't just not have lights, for instance, in the sanctuary. We've never been able to buy the proper screens for our projectors. Those would cost probably $10,000. It might be worth considering just replacing those screens and those projectors with new televisions. Our fire alarm system would work. The water would go off, right? But it would not contact the police. The alarm would go off, and that's more than 20 years old. It's no longer made. The company that put it in doesn't exist. We've had several people come out. It can't be fixed. It's probably about $35,000 to fix and to put in a new one, just so that when the alarm goes off and the water goes out to save our building, the police are called. So we have a lot of deferred maintenance. And so we want to challenge you in light of the fact that we're investing in people. We've spent about, rightly in calling staff, we've spent about $350,000 more dollars a year than we did 3 years ago. We paid our youth pastor more than the one who left. We hired him an assistant, so we have a woman serving that ministry. We hired a new second service worship director. We hired Chad Turner. We hired Rob Penley, right? So we invested in people, and we want to take care of them. We, like the church, faces that same 6% inflation rate. So if we bring in $2 million this year, next year that same $2 million gets us 6% less. Our health insurance has gone up. We have tons of deferred maintenance. We have some things we'd like to see that we can't do. And we hope, and we want to challenge you to consider giving to your church, that your church needs it. So this is really my third point. How can you help? You can help in two ways. You can pray for your church. Yes, I'm talking about money, and that's appropriate, but you can pray that God would use us to see his gospel go forth in Tucson, to see people born again, to see people drawn back to faith in Jesus Christ. And you can pray that God would help us carry out his ministry, that we would see more missionaries funded, that we would see more churches planted, we would see more local ministries blessed. But not only can you pray about the ministry, you can participate in the ministry. How do you want to serve in your church? What area do you want to serve in? You want to be involved in city serve? Do you want to usher? Do you want to sing in the choir? Do you want to serve in the youth ministry? How do you want to participate in your church? It's great to come to worship, but how do you want to serve here? And finally, what I'd really like you to do is prayerfully consider what God would have you give at the end of the year. You may not know this, but 35% of our giving comes in December. And so in the last 4 years, for instance, in the last month of the year, we have taken in between $480,000 up to $501 in different years. So 35% of our money comes in the last year. And I know that people like you are making decisions about where you should give your money. And you might go, well, look, it looks like the church is doing well. Certainly our projection, we projected $2 million to come in last year, because last year what came in was 1.98, so we did a little increase. But I want you to really pray about what God would have you give, because for us to run this budget in a healthy way, to care for the staff we have presently working for us, to take care of them, for us to face the inflation we have as we pay our own bills, for us to face a good number of deferred maintenance issues, some of which need to be addressed, we're hoping and praying that $2.2 million would come in this year, and that's what would come in next year. And I want to challenge you to ask God what he would have you to give. Now, not all of you are giving into your gifts. Some of you have, and many of you have faithfully been giving along, and you don't have more to give, but some of you do. So please pray and ask, how can I participate in this church, and what does God want me to give to this church? We want this church to be a place that takes the gospel into the hearts of those attending, into the hearts of our neighbors, into the heart of our town, and ultimately into the heart of the rest of the world. And we do that not only as we pray and preach and meet, but we do that as we give. Would you consider how God wants you to give at the end of the year? Thank you for your graciousness and what you have given. Thanks for hearing me. I look forward to seeing you soon.